Morning all. I covered in my evening lecture last night two Fischer games which I haven't shown you yet. It was in that Yugoslavia tournament of 1959 in fact, where actually Fischer lost all four games to Mikhail Tal, who was on his way to go and defeat Botvinnik, but later Botvinnik reclaimed his crown from Tal. He had to adapt a lot of his openings, etc., and not give Tal such dangerous attacking positions. So Mikhail Tal wiped out Fischer in this year, in this tournament in Yugoslavia, and we see now the two King's Indian games. I'll try and do one of them in this video and another one in another video pretty soon after. Okay, so Mikhail played d4 and Fischer played the King's Indian defense. And we have what is known as the Petrosian system here. The most usual move is the castle mainline King's Indian classical. Castle, wait for black to play knight c6, then we have d5 and usually knight e7. And in that case, with the knight on e7, this bishop g5 isn't such a pain. There isn't a direct pin of this knight on the queen. Now you'll see some differences here now after d5. Without this knight coming to e7, this bishop g5 is more effective. It's a really annoying pin for a start. Now I think the most popular system according to chessgames.com here, and I think is what Fischer played later on in his career, simply play a5, try and use this c5 square. Not worried too much about bishop g5 or even queen d2 after. So if white wants to exchange off the dark square bishops, that might come at a cost for black, later undermining the queen side and trying to use the c file and dark square pressure, maybe even queen b6 later or queen a5. So there's sufficient counterplay, I believe, with a5, at least statistically. A5 and this plan of using c5 I think is the more modern approach now to the position. Fischer played knight bd7, but his intent with this is not for a5 and knight c5. It's slightly different. After bishop g5 we see the annoying pin, and how is this bishop dislodged without creating weaknesses? Well, it comes at a price, but with h6 it becomes possible for knight h7 later to g5, which Fischer makes use of. So he plays this move h6. It also of course stops that battery from occurring, which would mean h6 would be then impossible. So here I think a popular continuation, believe it or not, even though it's ugly looking, is g5, even though it's like hemming in the bishop. But Fischer played this move a6, which a lot of the times in the King's Indian can serve to slow down white's queenside attack, especially like ruling out like knight b5s later when white peels open thematically the c file. That's the exploitable base of the pawn chain. The thematic break white's aiming for most of the time is c5 here. And it's interesting, what's very interesting about this game is it isn't completely like stereotypical strategic play from Mikhail Tal. Well, he kind of makes use of the c5 break to create a kind of pressure on c7, which leaves Fischer trying to defend via f7, which leaves this diagonal kind of more vulnerable, and also the f file as a target coordinating on f7 later. So the thematic break of c5 is used in a very creative attacking way that we do really see at Tal going for Fischer's king, despite it being a King's Indian defense, where black's usually allowed to attack white on the king side. It's not the case from these two King's Indian games that we're about to witness. After castle's queen e8, breaking the pin as well now, so the knight's really free to move to h7. And I suppose the other choice is knight h5, but from h7 it can go to g5. If knight h5, maybe it's no big deal. If like rook e1 and bishop f1, it can be kicked later with g3 maybe. So knight d2 now, so knight h7 is made use of. The problem, with this, which I mentioned, last night, is if black gets the classical like pawn storm. Usually, he wants to play like g5 and wait for white to play f3, then build up for g4 and use, rook f7, bishop f8, rook g7, that kind of thing. But with knight coming to g5, that's kind of blocked up. But actually, in this game, well, two King's Indian games now. It's confusing me. This is a slightly different plan from the other King's Indian game, where Fischer actually made use of knight g5. Here, he played actually bishop f6, and okay. So bishop f6 is slightly weakening the dark squares, but if this plan of getting pawns like this happens, this bishop will be looking silly on g7. So in principle, it's good to exchange it, but Tal is not playing it stereotypically here. He gets his cake and he gets to eat it. He weakens black's light squares, but he doesn't want this pawn chain attack coming in with f5 f4, because what happens here. First of all, this queen e3 is also worth noting that it's supporting c5. So in the absence of white's bishop, coming like this, Tal is still, preparing this thematic c5 break. So that's an interesting move. But watch now, c5 f5. Now usually a player might routinely play f3 and allow f4 and allow g5. But here, in this case, with the bishop gone, these dark squares will be more vulnerable actually if white ever plays f3, and black has still got his attack, and the pieces are all pretty good, and the bishop in particular can support g4 later. But none of this happens. The fun's taken away. Tal is not going to be pressurized too much on the king side here. He takes on f5, and g takes is played. Well, if rook takes, then that gives white the e4 square, which is often very good. Every Russian schoolboy knows that a knight on e4 like this in the King's Indian usually wins. So g takes f5. Of course, Fischer not Russian, but might as well have been. How strong he was at that age, even that age. It was just the next year he managed to draw against Tal. Very, very interesting game in the French defence. And then soon after that, he beats Tal. But here Tal is on his game. He wins this tournament, and he beats Fischer 4 times. So we've seen 2 of them in the Sicilian. Now here is a critical position, and the f pawn is used here. The rook is kept there for a purpose, f4. And of course the queen's a natural blockader of e4. If e4, that would look undesirable for a lot of reasons. The d4 square. Pressurizing f5, and then maybe like stuff like this to try and weaken this diagonal. So that wouldn't that would be a fixed target, this pawn chain here. So Fischer elects for what he perceives as a lesser evil. He takes on f4, so he's got isolated pawns now, but he's still got this other issue of congestion on the queen side, and white can seize the e file and also try and pressure this diagonal, and this is exactly what happens now, and it's at the cost of a pawn. Though Tal is sacrificing the c5 pawn. He doesn't exchange queens. That would allow black maybe an easier game if queen e7, knight takes, then knight g6 for example. Black can make use of the e5 square, get his bishop out, put a rook on e8. It might be able to get a good position. But no, pawn sack here, pawn sack time, positional sacrifice. What's the idea? Queen takes f4. The idea to sacrifice c5 and if needed b4 in order to make better use, get better quality rooks than Fischer's rooks. The rooks are going to quickly try and grab the e file, put more pressure on f5 with bishop d3, generally target the king. The king's going to be targeted now. So d takes c5, and now Tal starts pointing things at Fischer's king. Bishop d3, not minding c takes b4 here. So rook a e1. So what is white gaining? Well, he can regain his pawn now if he needs with bishop takes f5, but that will leave him maybe in an uncomfortable pin. He actually sacrifices an entire knight now, believe it or not. Well, this is Mikhail Tal after all, so I guess you should expect such things. So rook e6. Now let's see. Actually, let's see. Is it what would Houdini play here in this position? Would it even consider rook e6? It's indicating queen takes b4 and bishop takes f5. It's not really considering Tal's move, it's just sacrificing the knight on c3. This is like depth quite a big depth actually. Bishop f5. Rook e6 is in the candidates now. Pardon the pun. It's in the candidates. It was in the candidates, but Bishop f5 is looking like a strong move for a significant advantage, and also Knight a4 as well. But Rook e6 featured there for a moment as a good move. Okay, so let's go with Tal's move, Rook e6. So best apparently is Queen g7 here, but Fischer took the bait. He played Queen takes c3. Queen g7, Queen b4 is an engine line, or Queen f7 next best, significantly worse than Queen g7 apparently. But Queen takes c3, whoa, and the evaluation's gone up hugely for white. So what on earth is going on here? Well, if we look at the relationship between quality, time and material, okay, white's deficit is in material, but his gain is in quality. Look at the rooks, the bishop, the knight even is ready to spring into the game. The black king safety, so the quality is definitely better. These guys are spectators at the moment. Bishop takes f5 check, and now I think it's a disaster if the king moves here. Like say here, then just rook takes h6 as a mate in 3. If takes, then queen h6, and this is like, you know, mate. So that's obviously, it's not very good idea to allow rook takes h6. King g7 equally bad. This is pretty dire. Here a clinical move in this position is queen e4. Okay, so going into that e6, protecting g6, which means the discovered and double check is now on, and black would have a hard time now. So bishop takes c8, pinning the knight, getting more material. So that's downhill, obviously. So Fischer had to countersack countersack to stave off the attack. He's at least taking away the attacking bishop. So how can Mikhail win with just the rooks and that knight on b3? Well, check. Let's turn the engine off. King h8. And now, as I mentioned last night, look at these queen moves. They're ruled out by the knight on b3. And queen e1 is not possible, and queen d4 is not possible. The knight's stopping a lot of the queen checks, which means rook f3 is possible. Rook lift, maybe rook g3, rook h3, very nice attacking possibilities. Queen b2 is played, and now a horrible double pin. Rook e8, pinning the bishop, pinning the knight. So the threats on the horizon now are numerous. But with this knight pin, if knight f6, then white could just take again and just make use of the second pin on the c8 bishop to try and get rook f8 in. So actually this is actually what happened. It's difficult to suggest moves for black. Actually, let's just engine check a few other defenses. What would be the best defense here? If queen g7, then rook g3 comes in. So this is fairly unpleasant. That looks completely a terrible idea to allow this rook g3. So black would have to be playing a move like this and then giving up the queen. So that's not too hot, queen g7. But what else can we suggest here? There's not too many moves, black, because he's pinned up the pieces as spectators. If knight b8, there's rook takes g8, king takes, this is clinical stuff, check, and the rook and queen are enough to come in for the kill here. If queen g7, there's rook f7, if king g6, check, and it's all going to be over. Check, picking up the queen now. So basically this is bad news, this position after rook e8. It's crushing. It's end of game really. Fischer played a few more moves. He played knight df6. Tal's gaining back his material, still with the nasty pins. Horrible pressure which can't actually be parried. As if Mikhail's going to play takes, and now king takes. No, he plays knight a5. so the knights can't move, and this knight's now rerouting actually to get to e5 to play rook f7 and just win the knight safely, to just win another piece if needed. So h4, h5, after h5, Fischer's had it really. He's just waiting for execution. If he had played b6, then knight c6 is also just killing. Knight takes the bishop's. It's losing more material, so there's nothing really black can do here. And after knight e5, Fischer actually resigns. The threat of rook f7. That's it. So the beautiful thing about it from a thematic point of view is white's use of c5, but then not allowing black for a kingside attack, not giving black the fun of the King's Indian defense. By the way, check out facebook.com/King's Indian Defense. I'll put this video there along with the other one of their encounters. But it's a not such a great way of playing against the Petrosian system, in my opinion. With this a6 in particular, I prefer, and I think Fischer later preferred, a5 and knight c5, with the idea that queen e8, and then you can even still do the knight h7s, the f5s. But you try and get a knight to c5 reinforced with a5 to try and discourage b4, and also even some plans like c6 later. But this seems passive, a6, and it didn't. It was the same move used in their other encounter in that tournament. So it seems once Fischer had his repertoire against the Petrosian system, his idea, he used it again, and okay, he did try and deviate later. So in the two games, there was a deviation. In the other game, it showed f5, not this bishop f6. So he plays bishop f6 here. So white's not really giving black the fun of the King's Indian. He's getting his cake and eating it. The c5 break. He's preparing the c5 break, and once Fischer plays f5, he clinically kind of takes and then plays f4, and it's actually black's king, because these pawns are now like offered as sacrifices against these spectator pieces in particular, and black's kind of weakened squares around his king. It's used against black for this pawn sack. It seems a huge compensation. White's actually getting a crushing position out of this, and he does. He accelerates again with now a piece sacrifice. It doesn't bother moving the knight, which could give maybe Fischer time to get the bits out of the box. But no, rook e6, no time. Bishop takes f5, and now this horrible pin situation is emerging after rook e8. So it's a really incisively played game, not following the normal stereotypical patterns of the King's Indian, where black's often given a free ride on the king side for a pawn storm. None of that is given. So it was quite severe punishment for Fischer at that time. I hope you enjoyed it. It was good for Fischer's development, yeah, please check out facebook.com/King's Indian Defense for other King's Indian videos. Thanks very much. And also, facebook.com/Fischer Chess Fans. I will also post the video there. Okay, cheers.